chaos, fighting the Joneses, workaholic, working myself to death, working 8 to 12-hour days, 7, 8, 9 days a week.
Hi, I'm Jack Crowley, the president of Water Street Mission in Lancaster City. Welcome to the Restorers Podcast. Work is often touted as the solution or remedy to homelessness, but is that really the case? Today we're going to listen to the story of one of our guests and hear his own journey along the way and see what we can learn from it. For the record, we have changed his name to protect his privacy. I want to give a special thank you to our Season 2 sponsors, MHEB Incorporated, Amish Gazebos, Espen Shade Farms, and Espen Shade Mills. To learn more about our sponsors, visit wsm.org/podcast. Today, we're excited to have Joe Larkin, one of our step-up coaches, with us to help us kind of unpack some things from one of our clients' stories. So, Joe, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here, Jack.
It's good to have you with us. Yeah. And we're going to jump right in. In this first clip, George is going to share a little bit about the physical decline that he's dealing with because of his previous work.
Yeah. Blood pressure was off the roof. I had diabetes, but that didn't really have anything to do with it. But the stress levels that I was putting myself under and things like that, trying to succeed, were outrageous. It took me a while to learn just to calm down. And through meditation and things like that, practices that I was taught at the mission, it did help.
So George is talking about, he used to work in the restaurant industry, I believe, okay. And the stresses of work and how that compounds in the physical wear and tear. Mm-hmm. Is that a common story? I mean, you work with our guests and often talking about vocation and work.
Sure.
Is that a common story that the physical wear and tear stress often is a beginning contributing factor to their journey downhill?
Yeah, it really is, on a couple of different levels. One is, if that's what a guest is used to, that type of work, even though they're at a point in life where it really is not, compatible with their physical well-being, but that's all they know. So they put themselves in a situation where it's just, as George said, it's stressing them out, but that's all he knows, and it's a fear of, if I don't do this well, this is all I know. Where am I going to be?
Yeah.
So the fear of I could be out of a job, I could be out of a place, and it's beating my body up. So on so many different levels, it's having and I've seen it with other guests. It's like, this is what I do. This is what I've done.
Right.
So part of what we do in Step Up is try to say, let's consider else, because I can refer myself. I know I could not. Be doing some of the things I used to do,
right?
And it's not going to work for the long term.
Yeah.
So for George, I get it. Man, that's tremendous stress.
And the stress that he's feeling, so the physical wear and tear of the job, the stress of, can I do this anymore? Can I not? I got to succeed. I got to work hard. And then he mentioned, he didn't even know how to calm down. He didn't know how to deal with that stress until he got here. Is that common as well?
Yeah, it really is, and it's it's kind of the joy of what we do. Like to say, it's okay. We can relax. We're going to help you to the So we just give them a little some space to breathe, to relax, and say, we'll find a better way for you right now. And it's almost giving them permission to relax. And I think for a lot of us, Jack, it's we have this default behavior. So if I'm high stress all the time, it's just how I operate, because they've been in, a lot of our guests, in high stress for most of their lives. So it's just kind of a pattern of behavior. Yeah. So with the meditation, with some of the classes, and even with us, is saying, let's find a way where we could de-stress you.
Yeah, so it's kind of the spiritual classes that are helping them understand themselves, and their relationship with God leads to that, but also just relationally, giving them permission to breathe and relax and calm down. That's a great thing.
Yeah, it is.
Let's hear a little bit more of George's story.
Great.
Well, when my foot went down and the diabetes had taken over, the blood pressure taken over, my body started giving out. I just couldn't perform the job that I was doing. I just couldn't do the 50, 60, 70 hours a week. I was lucky if I was able to do 20. My boss was very kind and held me on as long as he could. But at that point then, it's hard to get a job and to keep one. So that's when I ended up being homeless and all that.
Yeah, I think just hearing that struggle, and in George's case, a very extreme health issue, obviously having his leg amputated, and suddenly everything he's known is disrupted. Such a difficult situation, but again, this pattern of, here's a guy who worked hard his whole life. I think what struck me in that clip is, I couldn't work the 50, 60, 70 hours I was used to.
Yeah. 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 I mean, amazing that he's even working.
Right.
When you think somebody just, with their illness and had an amputation and they go do a physical job.
Right.
A couple of different things. You say, wow, what determination, that's amazing. But the other part of it is, this is all I know. Mm-hmm. Even though this doesn't make sense on almost any level, but this is all I know. I guess this is what I have to do to survive. So, that's...
and leading into that he had a job that he felt, and probably because of the financial realities, it was necessary to work 50, 60, 70 hours a week in order to make ends meet. I'm sure he wasn't just doing that for the joy of the extra 30 hours on the job, but to pay the bills, to make it work. And so then when you have physical complications, it was taking 70 hours of work to pay your bills, make it happen. Now you can't do nearly what you used to do, and it starts feeling hopeless.
Yeah. Now you're 20 hours. You're 20 hours, and none of your expenses have dropped down to 20 hours, of income. So he's already stressed out.
Right.
And then you put that into the mix. Overwhelming. And
he even mentioned that his boss was willing to be flexible, but there wasn't any room for that. So it's not about a lack of sympathy for the employers. It's, there are certain jobs and they may not have other opportunities within their business for somebody who doesn't have the physical capabilities. And so it wasn't like he was done wrong by his employer, but just a difficult circumstance all around.
And work has to get done.
Yeah.
I mean, the boss can have empathy, can be compassionate, but it has to get done. Right. And as much as he cares for George, it had to be. So there is that line of, this just can't go on.
Yeah. Let's listen to the next clip here.
I was just so frustrated by doing all, I busted my butt at work, excuse my French, but I'm homeless and there's no reason for that. Because I was making all kind of money, I was paying bills, I don't understand why I was this way. So that added to the stress, which added to the high blood pressure, which didn't help the diabetes.
That's frustrating to listen to.
Yeah.
Right? He's frustrated living it.
Can't imagine, man.
So that cycle, the perpetual cycle of, you lose the physical health, you can't work, that creates more stress, your health gets worse. Yeah. It becomes a self-perpetuating cycle for somebody.
And options get more and more limited. How am I going to take care of myself? There are it could be Social Security, it could be those kind of things to help, but that doesn't always happen in a timely fashion. When the bills are still there and they're not waiting for to George get his life figured out. I think one of the things that we try to do with our department in reacting to a situation like George, it's never too late, and there can be change. So let's see with what you're dealing with, what might work for you. And sometimes there's easy answers, sometimes there's not. And it's one of the great challenges of what we do, because here's someone obviously willing to work, great work ethic, going to work in a physical job after amputation, so he wants to. So that's there. So we get to look at really honestly evaluate what can you do, George, what might work for your situation.
Well, and that speaks to there was almost a sense of confusion. He didn't use the word.
Yeah.
He talked about frustration and stress, but he's like, I don't get it. Like, I've always been able to work and pay the bills, and I'm homeless. Like, how did this even happen?
Yeah.
And there's at some point it's like, wait a minute, the world's just spinning. And so to have that ability to kind of help them take a step back, like, okay, here's what's happened, but here's where you are, and let's look forward. Yeah. So there's one more clip I want to listen to that kind of talks about how his journey to Water Street.
I grew up in Lancaster, so I knew about Water Street But there again, it was knowing something completely different than what it was. When I thought Water Street Mission, I thought of drunks, drug addicts, thieves, bums. They didn't care about themselves. They didn't care about having a job. So that's why they don't have a house.
It's interesting hearing, I mean, we know those stereotypes exist, right? But it's interesting hearing that from one of our guests that prior to coming here, that was his view of Water Street too.
Yeah, it's like, I don't want to, like, I'm not one of those. You know, I don't fit into those categories. You know,
right.
Like, what would I be there?
Yeah.
You know, how did this happen? Like you said, how did this happen?
And that can be a real barrier for people too, seeking help. When you have this picture in your mind of like that, oh, well, that's what Water Street's for, and I don't fit into that, or you don't want to admit that you might be in that category. Even if you have a more gracious perspective of who might be staying here, you're not ready to admit that. We all struggle with that shame.
Yeah. And it's interesting. It's not across the board, but it's so often I'll hear, I didn't know it was like this.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, you know, the programs are offering, and I think above and beyond the program, the love, the care, the acceptance.
Absolutely.
And we love you, we want to help you.
Yeah.
And it's not like you failed, get in here and we're going to straighten you out. The guests really respond, and it's almost across the board, like I was saying, to the personal attention and care. And, you know, I like to say it's never too late.
Yeah.
You know, like, you know, with George, your situation, it's not too late. There can be change. You're not stuck on this path. And so, it restores hope.
Right.
And I think that's the beauty of what Water Street, it can shatter some of those, you know, perceptions that are outside of people.
The myths, the only people who are homeless are, you know, they're lazy, or they're, it's drug addiction, it's all these different things.
Just get a job.
Yeah. And are there people struggling with those things? Yes. But what's even behind those?
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't start there. George didn't start there.
Yeah.
Right. He was a hardworking guy who was dealing with some struggles. So.
It's so humbling, you know, and, you know, we get to sit with the guests who are, a lot of them in those situations. And, you know, I say it to, you know, my friends and family outside of here, but the grace of God, why me?
Yeah.
You know, why do I get to have my life? And these folks who have incredible difficulties didn't say, hey, I want to be homeless or I don't want to work. Just life came at them very, very hard, whether it's physical illness, mental health, whatever that might be.
Right.
You know, it's the grace of God for any of us that we're not sitting on the other side of that table. And, you know, for somebody like George, you know, our heart in Step Up, and I think throughout the mission, is to restore hope and say, we'll help you find a way to restore and maybe alleviate that stress, you know, so that that joy can be restored, that sense of self that you lost because you lost your job and I can't pay, you know, my way right now.
Yeah.
You know, so that's part of the blessing.
That's such a big deal.
Yeah.
That's great. We're going to listen to George some more. At this point, he's at Water Street. He's enrolled in our residential programs and spiritual classes, and he's going to talk a little bit about the impact of that. Let's hear what he has to say.
In that class, I found out who God said I was. And that's the big thing. That's the ticket. He looks at me as his child. I'm a child of God. Well, that got me thinking, if I'm his child, and I'm to come to him like a child, why am I trying to be the grown-up in this situation?
That's great. Why am I trying to be the grown-up in this situation? What a great line. Man, so George, he's learning something about himself here, and that idea of being a child of God. How do you see that play? And when that realization hits home for somebody, for one of the men or women you're working with, how does that affect how they deal with stress, but also how they view themselves and the opportunities in front of them?
Yeah, I think, you know, when the guests have that awakening, like the burden is lifted to such a large degree, like saying, I don't have to carry this. I don't have to be the adult. It's not all on me. It's freedom. You know, and there's, you know, they've had a life maybe of the other way, so it doesn't like come together right away, but there is that sense of like maybe a renewed hope or a new hope. So it's really beautiful to watch. And I know George, and I know when he speaks about his relationship with God and what happened, it's not like he's, you know, supposed to say this, or I should do this, or I'm here and this is what they think. It's genuine.
Yeah. There's a deep realization. You can hear it in his voice, but you see it in him too. When you talk to George, you see that.
It's the real deal. It's so authentic.
Yeah.
It's so coming from his soul, and it's so awesome.
Yeah. Let's hear some more from George.
The childhood state is all in mind. It's like choosing to be joyful. Joy is a choice. Being a child is a choice. As that T-shirt says, growing old is inevitable. Growing up's a choice. But I'm also trying to be respectful and do what needs to be done.
It actually reminds me of another guest we had here a long time ago, Santiago, who talked about happiness comes from the things around you, but joy is a choice.
Yeah.
And it comes from God, and you can't be taken away. And that idea of that childlike pot, like that's a deep insight from George there about like choosing to have that childlike worldview and posture, knowing you're a child of God. And for somebody who spent their whole life, like George did, working his butt off, maybe even finding value through the work and not through who he was, like that shift, what does that do? And then enabling him to take a different approach in life.
Yeah, I think for most of us, we're vulnerable to, if circumstances line up, we're good. And his have been stripped away to a large extent, where we can't say things are well externally, right, or even physically. Yeah. So he gets to really have, for George, like, I'm leaning on you, Lord, because I can't even lean on my own body. I can't lean on my, what I do at work and find my purpose and my identity there.
How important is that ability to kind of accept where you're at, accept all the negatives that have happened, but understanding who you are, to pursuing what's next, the job growth, even more so, like, because in certain of our guests' case, they're not going to go out and get a high-paying job.
Right.
We're going to have to help them find other sources of income.
Yes.
But we all still have that need for purpose, for using the gifts God's given us. How does accepting, like that process of accepting where you are right now and the realities, the hard realities, how important is that to being able to step into job growth or finding other ways to use your gifts?
Yeah, I mean, the word purpose is big, because I think a lot of our guests who right now aren't employed, and they most of their life is they found purpose in their employment, or in a relationship that's no longer there. So when those things are taken away, it's like, now what? So I think for us, when they have that spiritual awakening like George does, there's a renewed purpose, that purpose maybe he never even knew before, a greater purpose, the true purpose. But when it's stripped away from a lot of our guests, again, I'll say it, it's not too late. And, there's hope, and we will do, and we share it within our department. Like, we want to help you.
Yeah.
We want to help you. We'll find a way. It may not be an easy answer. We may not even know what the process is.
Right.
We're going to learn it together if we don't know. So I think that gives them like an assurance of, I'm not alone. This is going to be okay.
Yeah.
And it is a new way, and it may be a new path and something they never even considered, but accepting where we're at, I think for all of us, this is it. This is where I'm at now. It's that acceptance is it's a big step.
And for George, it wasn't too late. It's still not too late. And I think we have one more clip from George here today.
My future plan is hopefully get my leg working, get a place of my own, and move forward. But that's not how it has to happen. Whatever happens, happens, and I will go with it. Because there's a lot of times where when I was running the show, I ended up in places should have never went. Putting him in charge of the wheel, it gets to be interesting sometimes. Not necessarily where you end up, but how you got there and why.
So we end up in a very different place with George here, whereas, and I think you said it in the last piece, like finding that identity and working hard and everything. Yeah. Feels like George is in a different place now.
Yeah. I think for George and so many of our guests here, so much courage. Mm-hmm. I had somebody ask me last night, do you see many like miracles? And I said, well, there's not a lot of partying at the Red Sea, but for someone like George, or someone to say I have the courage to maybe try something different, maybe I have the courage to look at my financial credit report. I consider those like, wow.
Yeah.
Like they're big because, that alleviates shame, it alleviates stress. So it's God working in little ways that are really miraculous. And George is more so it's pretty radical to have an amputation, to lose your occupation, to be homeless.
Oh my gosh.
But that new identity, he's embracing it. God's so gentle with us as we come into that.
You said something in that last bit I think is really critical. Like there's, in this season of accepting where you are, accepting who you are, it's not a resignation though.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of times when everything's falling apart and the relationships are gone, the job's gone, the ability to get that kind of job again, acceptance of that, I think to the world sometimes feels like resignation. I just got to accept I'll never be able to do that again. And it takes you to a dark place.
Yeah.
And I'm accepting reality. But there was a freedom that we heard to say, like, I know where I went when I had the wheel. And I'm going to trust. Like, I'll be surprised where I end up and maybe even the journey, how I got there. How important is it for people to get to that place of acceptance, not resignation, but acceptance of the realities, especially in your role with Step Up, and you're trying to help people find that next piece of employment, vocation, purpose, even if it's not a job. How important is it for them to get to that place of acceptance, not resignation, but acceptance of the realities?
Yeah, and I think of the serenity prayer a lot. God help me to accept the things that can't change, and the courage to change the thing that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I share that with the guests because I think you can't be in denial because it is what it is, and here's reality. We want to be gentle and loving with them, but sometimes we have to deliver it, a hard truth, and because we love them, and we want the best. And in order to go forward, there's, like I said, it's not a resignation. And the world can say like, oh, he's lazy, he's given up. But no, acceptance is the answer. They say that in AA. Acceptance is the answer. And, for him to be there, you can see the peace.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of our guests, you won't be able to do what you did. And maybe your work history has really, you can't go back into the level you were working at before.
Right.
You're going to have to start at a different level.
Right.
That's just reality. So you may be a little kicking and screaming about it, but you have to accept it because that's the way it's going to unfold for you.
Yeah.
And most of our guests, again, with the healing atmosphere and the love and the truth, I'd say most do well with that hard truth of acceptance.
That's a huge takeaway. I appreciate you kind of wrapping up with that. Having heard George's story, any final thoughts you have? Any final takeaways?
Yeah, we get to do this every day. And there's degrees to it. I mean, George's, his physical stuff is extreme. Yeah. But I see George not as, look at him, he's failed, he's incapacitated in some ways. I see like someone like George, and a lot of our guests, is inspiring. The world will say, well, they look at them at Water Street, and I often say, if you could meet these guests and how they change our lives. So someone like George and many, many others here, we count them as blessings. Wow. And they're a blessing to the world we live in. So,
That's powerful. Thanks so much, Joe, for joining us today. Thanks for helping us pull some insights out of one of our guests' journey, but how it reflects so many others. And we appreciate that. I hope everyone who listened to us today or joined us online, that you enjoyed this conversation, that maybe you saw something new about Water Street and about the work that God's doing here every day. So thanks for joining us.